It's time to break down the Buffalo Bills Week 3 opponent, the challenges they present, and what the Bills need to do to deal with them today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, folks, it is time to get fully ready for the Bills' Week 3 matchup against the Washington Commanders. We're going to break this team down from every angle, discuss the keys to victory for the Bills on both sides of the football, and I want to have a big conversation on Sam Howell, the quarterback for the Washington Commanders, and give you some of my thoughts on what he's shown to this point and some of the opportunities the Bills might have against a young quarterback. So let's get into it. We'll start with the nuts and bolts. The Bills will travel to D.C. for a road date with the Washington Commanders in Week 3. The game will be played on Sunday, September 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at FedEx Field in Landover, Maryland. The game will be broadcasted on CBS. Andrew Catalon is on the play-by-play. Tiki Barber and Matt Ryan are your game analysts, and A.J. Ross is the sideline reporter. This is going to be the 17th all-time meeting between the Bills and Commanders. The Bills have a 10-6 record all-time against Washington, and the Bills have done quite well against Washington of late. They've won the last 2, including 8 of the last 9, and Sean McDermott boasts a 3-0 record in his career against Washington. The last time these teams met was back in September of 2021. The Bills beat Washington 43-21. Josh Allen threw for 358 yards and 4 touchdowns. The Bills enter this game 1-1. The Commanders are 2-0. They have defeated the Arizona Cardinals back in Week 1, a 20-16 win over Arizona. They were actually down 16-10 entering the fourth quarter and won the game 20-16. And then last week was a crazy game against the Denver Broncos. They won 35-33. We're down early in the game. We're down 21-3 with 9 minutes left in the second quarter. And they tied it up early in the third quarter. Denver then took the lead entering the fourth quarter. Washington then built a 9-point lead with 7 minutes left in the fourth. And then Denver winds up being a 2-point conversion away from tying it with no time left on the clock after a successful Hail Mary on the last play of regulation. But Washington got out of there with a win and improved to 2-0. Head coach of the Washington Commanders is Ron Rivera, 61 years old. In his 4th season as Washington's head coach, after 9 seasons as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. Of course, we know that Sean McDermott was Rivera's defensive coordinator for his first 6 seasons in Carolina. And then before that, Rivera and McDermott worked together under Andy Reid in Philadelphia. And actually, Rivera was McDermott's linebackers coach when McDermott was the defensive coordinator. Ron Rivera just won his 100th game in the NFL as a head coach. He boasts a record of 100 wins, 90 losses, and 2 ties. And so far in Washington, he went 7-9 his first season, 7-10 his second season, 8-8-1 last year, and 2-0 so far in 2023. Ron Rivera, one of the great people in the NFL. Living in Charlotte, I had a front row seat to how he can impact a community. He's a great leader and somebody that I think everyone has a lot of respect for. I will say, though, that he has uneven results as an NFL head coach. 12 seasons to this point completed as an NFL head coach, only 3 winning records in those 12 years. But it's fair to point out that he took over tough situations in both Carolina and Washington. The year before he came to Carolina, the Panthers were 1-15. And then obviously we know what Washington has been through in recent years. Now let's have a conversation about this quarterback, Sam Howell, 23 years old, 6'1", 220 pounds, was a 5th-round pick in 2022 out of North Carolina by the Washington Commanders. He's played in and started 3 games so far in the NFL for the Commanders, the final game of 2022 and the first 2 games this year. And Washington has won all 3 of those starts. In those 3 starts, Sam Howell completing 64% of his passes for 670 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a passer rating of 92.4. So some pretty good success throwing the football. He can also run it. He has 2 rushing touchdowns in his 3 starts. I'll tell you what, I've watched all 3 of these starts, and there's a lot to like about what Howell has shown so far, especially in the 2 starts in 2023 with Eric Bienemy as the offensive coordinator. You could tell they have a lot of trust in Sam Howell. They're running deep drop-back passes that require full progressions, and for Howell to make a lot of decisions, and he's made his share of plays. He's got plenty of arm talent. I wouldn't call his arm talent elite, but it's certainly above average. He's a tough and physical quarterback. He'll hang in the pocket. He'll deliver throws under pressure. He's a physical runner. He's got good contact balance. And that really came to light in his final season at North Carolina, where you saw him really take a step as a runner and be able to weaponize his legs. And we've seen that already so far in the NFL. Now, I had a 2nd-round grade on Sam Howell coming out of North Carolina. He fell to the 5th round, and I think the system he ran at North Carolina factored into his fall, if you will, as a prospect. If you recall, entering the 2022 college football season, Sam Howell was frequently mocked in the top 5 of mock drafts, and then, of course, he fell as a prospect. And I mentioned some things about Sam Howell in the past, but I think the system that he played in college really factored into that fall. His offensive coordinator in college was Phil Longo. If that name is familiar, it should be. We've talked about him a lot as it relates to Dawson Knox and Dawson Knox's status entering the NFL. The system that he runs is productive in college, but it's not good for quarterbacks in their development. Static alignments, there's no motion, binary reads, manufactured throws, very little fundamentals as it relates to footwork and pro-style elements of a passing game. And when you thought about Sam Howell, you like some of the physical attributes, but they're figured to be a notable adjustment for him, adjusting to the NFL. And I think that contributed to him sliding to the 5th round. And I think Longo's system is just, like I mentioned, not good for quarterbacks. It's known to only have about 20 plays in it altogether. And we know that that's very different than what the NFL is going to challenge you with. In fact, Drake May, who is UNC's current starting quarterback, that many believe is going to be a top 5 pick in the coming draft, was set to transfer away from North Carolina this past offseason if they didn't move on from Longo, which they did. But I'll tell you what, falling to the 5th round could have been the best thing to happen for Sam Howell because it created a chip on his shoulder. Sam Howell, he attended Sun Valley High School, and I mentioned that because I lived about 1 mile from Sun Valley High School while Howell was the starting quarterback. And actually my older brother, my younger brother, and my sister all went to Sun Valley High School. So we're well acquainted with the community that he grew up in. And, you know, we were certainly part of it as he was a star quarterback in high school. And so my familiarity with him is something I want to mention here. Big time recruit coming out of high school. And there was a lot of belief that he would get to this stage, right? That he would be an NFL starting quarterback. And he had a very successful high school career. He goes to North Carolina. He rewrites all the record books. And I think the first time he was ever really doubted was when he slid in the draft. And we know how that can fuel some guys. And so I think that's something that, you know, it doesn't help Sam Howell's wallet in terms of falling in the draft, but it maybe put him in a position where he's getting the opportunity that he is right now. And so far it looks pretty good. And obviously Washington, they made a calculated choice to enter this season with him as the starter. They had chances this offseason to bring in a veteran or draft a quarterback, and they were committed to Howell. I think that's meaningful because this feels like a make or break year for Washington and this regime. There's new ownership in place, which is great for the NFL. I'm happy for the fans of Washington to rid themselves of Daniel Snyder, but this is definitely an evaluation year for everyone involved. And I went through the records. They've been a really average operation under Ron Rivera over the last 3 seasons, but so far it looks like they made the right decision sticking with Sam Howell. So I want to get into Sam Howell and what he's shown so far as a player. But first, I need to tell you about Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful, but you know what? Sometimes it is. And Game Time is here for you. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And they got killer deals on last-minute tickets. They've got a best price guarantee. And so with that, you can stop stressing over getting tickets and start getting excited for the fun that you're going to have. The app is awesome. They have flash deals for last-minute tickets. You get an image of the seat view, so you know exactly what to expect when you get to the venue. They have great prices, and I'm a big, big fan. They also send the tickets right to your phone. You don't have to deal with sorting through emails. It's super easy to use. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Folks, I know you love the convenience of getting what you want delivered right to your door. I certainly do. With DoorDash grocery delivery, you can stock up for the week or order last-minute cravings conveniently. You've trusted DoorDash to deliver your restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivered right to you as well. And with thousands of grocery stores to choose from, you'll find the best in your neighborhood and boost your local economy with each and every order. You'll get exactly what you ordered too, or they will make it right. So sit back and enjoy quality groceries just like you picked them out for yourself. Got a deal for you. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order, up to $20 value when you use code LOCKEDONNFL at checkout. Limited time offer. Terms apply. Again, that's 50% off, up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and zero delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKEDONNFL. Don't forget, that's LOCKEDONNFL for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. All right, folks, let's get into some of the metrics with Sam Howell and some of the things that I've observed. Like I mentioned, I watched all three of his starts. I've studied his metrics, and so I want to talk about it and talk about the things that I think really stand out and matter most to me. Right now, Sam Howell, through 2 games this season, 2 starts, he's averaging 2.93 seconds average time to throw. That's a pretty high mark. You probably want to see that come down for Sam Howell. I mean, he's a guy that will hold on to the football, and him holding on to the football is resulting in a fair amount of pressure that he is inviting, and he's not fared that well under pressure to this point. That's expected for a young quarterback, especially with the adjustment to the style of offense he's running under Eric Bienemy compared to under Phil Longo at North Carolina, but only a 67.7 passer rating under pressure. And again, a lot of that pressure is due to him holding onto the football. Sam Howell has also been sacked a lot so far this season, sacked 10 times in 2 games, 12.7% of his dropbacks, which is just an insanely high number. So a guy that holds onto the football and takes a lot of sacks. And in fact, the pressure that he faces results in a sack far too frequently. 35.7% of the pressure Howell faces has resulted in a sack, which is the highest percentage of any quarterback in the entire NFL. I think these metrics are important to share, not because I want to talk down on Sam Howell, but it tells the story of some of my top observations on tape that I've already referenced. They're allowing Howell to take deeper drops, work progressions, and make decisions. Now, he's made some big-time throws in those moments, but he's also stuck on reads a bit too much in terms of too long. He'll hold on to the football, which, like I mentioned, it invites pressure. And he's also made some risky decisions with the ball, and he hasn't always seen the entire picture as it relates to underneath defenders and their ability to invade the catch point. So while he's made plays, he's also gotten away with some things that ideally the Bills can turn into both sacks and interceptions. And so I think Howell is very much in that space of learning what he can and cannot get away with. And I think he's gotten away with a good amount so far, and maybe that's going to give him some confidence to continue making some calculated choices with the football. And so far, it hasn't gotten him in trouble. And for the Bills, you certainly hope that you can make some plays on the football, because I think there's going to be some opportunities. Also, Sam Howell has a 16.5% play action percentage, which is a bit low. You know me, I like quarterbacks to be, around 30%. And I'm sure that there's something that goes into that with turning his back to the defense and what that picture looks pre and post snap. And so I'm sure there's some calculated choices there. but a low play action percentage, and only 2 throws so far this season were targeted more than 20 yards down the field. And so a very low percentage of throws going vertical, despite a lot of opportunities, right? They like to run double moves. You could tell with some of their deeper drops that they're looking to work the ball down the field. And so be ready for him to maybe start doing that a little bit more, because I think there's a lot of design for that to happen, but Howell hasn't necessarily pulled the trigger on a lot of those throws. In fact, his average depth of target is only 6.6 yards from the line of scrimmage, which is really low, 28th in the NFL. One thing that really stood out to me in watching the tape is the screen game that they have. We know what Bienemy and Andy Reid have done together in Kansas City, and you're seeing some of that show up with Washington. They're very effective with screens. Almost 12% of Sam Howell's throws are screen plays, and they got Denver last week with a beautiful flow screen on 2 different occasions. The same one that got the Bills against the Raiders in the first possession, where they got a big explosive play against the Bills on that flow screen. So you got to be mindful of the screen game that they're going to challenge you with. Howell actually has 103 yards in 2 games on screens, which is the most in the NFL by a good clip. Second in the NFL is Jordan Love at 77 yards, and he's averaging 10.3 yards per attempt on screens. And so I'm sure they saw the Bills kind of give up some screens against the Raiders and, of course, the Jets, and I'm sure they're going to challenge the Bills in that capacity as well. One more number here before we get into the rest of the offense, 2.9% check down percentage for Sam Howell, which is the lowest in the NFL. And so not a guy that at this point is wanting to really dump the ball down. And maybe that will change. I think it should, but it's certainly a metric that stood out to me, and I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention. The offensive coordinator for for the Washington Commanders is Eric Bienemy, 54 years old. In his first season in Washington, was the Chiefs' offensive coordinator for 5 seasons prior. And there are certainly elements when you watch Washington of what Kansas City likes to run offensively that carry over. You'd expect that to be the case, right? A lot of time Eric Bienemy had with Andy Reid, and certainly that is going to carry over to what his core principles are going to be as an offensive coordinator. And we also, it's worth mentioning that Eric Bienemy certainly has a lot of experience game planning against the Bills from his time in Kansas City. So far this year, in 2023, Washington has scored 55 points in 2 games, 7th most in the NFL. They're averaging 318 yards per game. That's 19th. They're converting 31.8% of their third downs, which is very low. That's 28th in the NFL. And they're scoring a touchdown on 62.5% of their red zone trips, 5 of 8 in terms of scoring touchdowns in the red zone, which is middle of the pack, right at 13th in the NFL. Let's talk about their personnel on offense. Their wide receivers, I think this is kind of the strength of their offense. Terry McLaurin, one of the premier wide receivers in all of the NFL. He's a guy that, despite very inconsistent quarterback play, has been very productive for Washington. Just signed a really big extension. Dynamic, right? Route running, speed. He's a do-everything guy. Now, he is playing with a bit of an injury, right? I think he's got turf toe. And so the production hasn't quite been there through the first couple of weeks of the season. I'm not sure how much that's limiting him, but he's certainly one of the top talents in the league at wide receiver. They've also got another guy that I love, and you're probably going to remember this name from our pre-draft conversations a couple of years ago, Jahan Dotson out of Penn State. I love this guy. I mean, he's a dog. He is an absolute dog. Route running. He's not a big receiver, but he plays big. He's really good in terms of ball skills, unbelievable hands. He's a tough matchup. And so I think this pair of receivers, McLaurin and Dotson, has the potential to be one of the best in the entire NFL and to be a good challenge for the Bills secondary against 2 really high-quality talents. One guy in McLaurin that's really proven himself, and one guy in Dotson that, when he's been healthy, he's made an impact, and I think he's going to be a high-volume piece of this offense for years to come. Their third guy is Curtis Samuel, kind of a hybrid player, does gadgety type things. He can take handoffs and do some of these things we've seen Isaiah McKenzie do throughout the years, but he's also a fairly good route runner and fairly good receiver as well. So that's their third option in the passing game. But all 3 of those guys have a lot of speed, a lot of shiftiness, a lot of twitch, a lot of athleticism. And so, the guys that you want to make sure get the opportunity to tackle these guys, you get them down because they're very, very explosive. They've also got some depth there in De'Ami Brown. who they drafted out of North Carolina, who hasn't really become a productive player in the NFL, but I like his skill set, particularly as a vertical player. And then Byron Pringle, who obviously knows Eric Bienemy from their time together in Kansas City, and I think as your fifth receiver is a pretty solid option. So pretty good depth to this wide receiver core. At tight end, Logan Thomas is their tight end, but we'll see on that. He had a concussion against Denver, a play that I'm sure you're familiar with. Kareem Jackson from Denver cleaned him up in the end zone on a touchdown catch, actually, and looked like a pretty severe hit. I'm not sure what the severity of the concussion is or what his forecast is, but that's their starting tight end. We certainly know Logan Thomas from his time with the Bills, and he's developed into a pretty good tight end in the NFL when he's been available, but he's been hurt a ton. Their backups are John Bates and Cole Turner, a couple of fairly recent draft picks, both on rookie deals. John Bates out of Boise State. Not a standout in any one category, but baseline skill as a blocker and receiver. He caught an impressive pass against Denver last week. Really a great throw from Sam Howell, right in between zones down the right sideline. It was a dime, one of the better throws I've seen this year from any quarterback. And John Bates was on the receiving end of that, but then he has a goofy drop later on in the game. So depth tight end. And Cole Turner, a guy that, they've gotten him going in the screen game a little bit, second-year player out of Nevada. I think he's more of a third type tight end, but with Logan Thomas being potentially out for this game, John Bates and Cole Turner might have more opportunity. Running back, that you could tell they got a type here at running back. They like big, tall running backs. Brian Robinson is their starter, second-year player out of Alabama. I think he looks really solid. I think he would have been even better last year as a rookie, but he got shot right before the season. And, I'm sure that's a lot to work through and come back from. But he's healthy, and I thought he was really good against Denver. And he's one of those just very cerebral ball carriers, no-nonsense runner, big physical back, has some movement skills. I mean, he's not overly explosive, but he's not a slug by any means. And I think he's going to be a quality starter in the NFL. A guy that just can really just pound the rock. I mean, makes good decisions, takes care of the football, and he's like 6'2", 225 pounds. So you better put your, lace him up and get ready to tackle, because he's going to challenge you. They've also got Antonio Gibson, who's been a flashy playmaker throughout his career with Washington. He's a young player in the NFL. He's had his moments as a runner and as a receiver. He's also had his share of lowlights, whether it's drops, whether it's fumbles. He's already had a fumble this year. Guy that seems to be kind of in and out of the doghouse as it relates to the inconsistency with his plays. But big athletic dude that, if you give him some space, he can make it pay. They also drafted Chris Rodriguez, another physical runner. I think all these running backs are over 220 pounds. Robinson's like 6'2". Gibson's like 6'1". I mean, a lot of size here to this backfield and really physical players. Let's talk about the offensive line. Their left tackle is Charles Leno in his 9th season in the NFL. He's been a reliable starter, but I think he's been kind of uneven. I thought he really struggled against Denver. And watching the tape, Denver has some good speed rushers, and thought they really kind of challenged Leno, and he gave up some stuff. So kind of an up and down player, but has been a long-time starter in the league. Their left guard is Sadiq Charles in his 4th season out of LSU. His previous 3 years, he's kind of been a reserve and a spot starter, but it looks like this is his chance to play and start at left guard. And I think through 2 games, it's went pretty well. And so the arrow is pointing up for him. Nick Gates is the center. Has been with the Giants for the past couple of seasons, was a starter for them. It's his first year in Washington. I think he's a sufficient level player, has looked pretty decent through a couple of games here in Washington. And then at right guard, Sam Cosmi, very athletic player, was an offensive tackle at Texas, started his career at Washington as a tackle and converted inside to guard. I think it's gone pretty well so far. I think this middle three has kind of been the surprising strength of this offensive line, because the tackles are really experienced. We'll talk about Andrew Wiley at right tackle here in just a moment, but this middle three was where you had, new players, right? Nick Gates coming over, Sam Cosmi transitioning from tackle. You've got Sadiq Charles, who's been a reserve. They're playing pretty decent there on the inside. And I think the tackles have been a little bit more inconsistent this year. I talked about Leno. Same thing with Andrew Wiley. He's been a serviceable starter in the NFL. He came over from Kansas City, was a starter for the Chiefs, really dating back to 2018. He seems like a serviceable starter, but I think he's been kind of up and down as well. So In some ways, this overall offensive line, I think, has exceeded expectations so far in 2023. I don't think they have a dominant starter in this group. They got some sufficient level players. I look at who they've played. I mean, Arizona doesn't really have any defensive line talent. And Denver has some talented edge rushers in Nick Benito, Randy Gregory, and Jonathan Cooper. And I thought they were really consistent with pressuring Sam Howell. And we talked about that already in the Sam Howell part of this conversation. But, they really kind of struggled with speed. Now, I don't think the Bills, outside of Leonard Floyd, who we'll see what his status is, I don't know that they have a ton of speed, but, this could be an opportunity for Greg Rousseau to get his first sack of the season. But I feel like this offensive line is giving up pressure, and it's coming from the edges, and it's coming from Sam Howell holding onto the football. And so I think that's kind of your path to getting to the quarterback. So I got 4 keys for you here for the Bills' defense against this Washington offense. Number 1 is capitalize on opportunities that Howell gives you, whether it's decisions, maybe some aggressive decisions, throwing the football, close and break on the ball and make plays. And then when he's holding onto the football, you got to get off blocks. You got to sack him. He's really sackable. Over 12% sack rate, 10 sacks in 2 games this year. Keep going. Keep rushing. You got to rush with great effort and motor and compete throughout the entire snap, because he will hold on to that football. Number 2 is be ready for more speed at wide receiver than you have. The Bills played Garrett Wilson in week 1, and I'm not sure they've seen a whole lot of speed otherwise. Trey Tucker maybe, but I mean, he's just a rookie. I think that this team with McLaurin, Dotson, and Samuel presents a lot of speed at receiver. In some ways, that's going to be a nice primer for next week against Miami. But you're going to be tested with more athleticism at receiver than you have this week. And I would tell you, I like a lot of the Bills secondary, but you don't look at the Bills secondary and think, wow, those are really athletic guys, right? In fact, I think the Bills have a speed deficient secondary. So they're going to be tested with that this week. You got to recognize screen. Number 3 is screen recognition. They're going to run some screens. They hide their screens really well. Their flow screens are really, really good. And so you better recognize screens better than you have against the Jets or the Raiders, because I thought that's been a bit of a black eye for this Bills defense so far. They're not recognizing the screen game well. And then number 4 is edge pressure. Talked about it, where this offensive line has been vulnerable this year is on the edges. And so it's time for your edge talent to show up and really affect Sam Howell and help you win the game. So those are my keys for the Bills defense against this Washington offense. All right, we're going to talk about the other side of this, the Bills offense against the Washington defense, here in just a moment. But first, need to tell you about Prize Picks. You got to check them out. Prize Picks is the largest, funnest, easiest, quickest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. The format is awesome. It's just you versus the numbers. It's not you versus thousands of other players, including pros, including sharks. It's just you versus the numbers. All you do is you select 2 or more players, you pick more or less than their projected stats, and you place your entry. That's it. Doesn't take long. You can make your entry in less than a minute, and withdrawals are super, super quick when you win. Love watching football. Love it even more when I have a Prize Picks entry going into the games. It just makes it that much more exciting. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, folks, let's talk about this Washington defense, a very talented unit that is coordinated by Jack Del Rio, who is 60 years old. In his 4th season in Washington, his 8th season as an NFL defensive coordinator. Of course, you might know him best as his time as a head coach in the NFL, 12 years as an NFL head coach, 9 of those with the Jaguars and 3 with the Raiders. Washington last year was 3rd in total defense, 7th in scoring. Like I mentioned, they have a lot of talent on that side of the football. So far in 2023, they've allowed 49 points in 2 games. That's 17th in the NFL. They've allowed 304 yards per game, which is 10th in the NFL. They've been really good on third down, 30.8% third down conversions allowed, which is 8th best in the NFL. And their red zone defense has been really good to start the year as well. Only 2 of 6 allowing the opposition to score a touchdown in the red zone, 33.3%, 3rd best in the NFL. Like I said, I watched these games. I think there's been some good and some bad with this defense. First of all, they played Arizona and Denver. Arizona is hardly an NFL operation that anybody should respect, right? They're clearly tanking. They don't have much talent, and Josh Dobbs is their quarterback, who they traded for like a week before the season. It's an absolute joke of an operation. And then Denver, who you think with Sean Payton going over there that they can elevate this football team, and I think it's been ugly for them on offense. I think Russell Wilson is a fundamentally flawed quarterback right now. I don't think he's playing good football. I don't think he's seeing the field well. As soon as any pressure comes, he's dropping his eyes. He just looks rough. And, they have a bunch of injuries at receiver as well. So I'm certainly mindful of who they played on defense to this point. Now, they have 10 sacks, so want to set the scene, and then we'll get into what I think has been good and bad from this defense. They have 10 sacks, 7 of them against Denver. Of course, they got Chase Young back this past week and had a sack and a half in the game. They've conceded some explosive plays in the passing game. That definitely showed up last week. Marvin Mims had like 2 50-yard touchdowns. One was a touchdown. One was just a long catch. Some big explosive plays out of him. They've also forced 4 turnovers, again, being mindful of it being Arizona and Denver. They're also giving up 4.5 yards per game on the ground, which is 24th most so far in the NFL. 4.5 yards per carry so far on the ground, 24th in the NFL. Let's talk about this personnel. Again, a lot of first-round picks, a lot of talent. Defensive end, their starters, Montez Sweat, Chase Young. 2 first-round picks. Chase Young was the defensive rookie of the year, and then it felt like he was hurt for 2 seasons, and now he's back. They didn't pick up his 5th-year option. Big year for Chase Young. Obviously, he delivered in a big way last week against Denver, and I'm sure he's going to look to keep that going. A player that, a lot of promise, is a super high draft pick, top 5 pick a few years back. He needs to stay healthy and fulfill that promise, which at times he has, and at times he's been either non-existent or hurt. Montez Sweat is another quality player that they have. I don't think he's an elite NFL defensive end, but he's certainly a slightly above average starter that presents a lot of problems and can get after the quarterback, can defend the run, is a versatile type player. Then they'll rotate in James Smith-Williams and Casey Toohill, a couple of veterans that I think are quality 3rd and 4th options at defensive ends when you have Montez Sweat and Chase Young as your starters. As defensive tackle, Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen, 2 more first-round picks. Daron Payne killed the Broncos. I mean, this guy was absolutely dominant, whether it was defending the run, rushing the passer, getting his hands on the football, and throwing windows. He is a stud, and he just got a big, huge contract, like $90 million contract. And so far, he's earning that. Jonathan Allen, I think, is he underrated? I don't know. I think he's one of the better defensive tackles in all the NFL. I'm not sure what most people think of him, but was a really good player coming out of Alabama. Not the biggest defensive tackle, but my goodness, he's quick and he's unbelievable with his hands. He's got some of the best hand usage in the entire NFL. And so the Bills' middle 3, Torrence, Morse, and McGovern, they're going to be challenged against these guys. Now, one thing, Connor McGovern playing in Dallas, he's got some familiarity with these players. That should help. But they got familiarity with him as well. But a good pair of defensive tackles, probably one of the better pairs in the entire NFL. I don't love their depth. Abdullah Anderson and John Ridgway is the depth players. I think they're going to want to have Payne and Allen on the field as much as possible. At linebacker, Jamin Davis is one of their linebackers, recent first-round pick as well out of Kentucky. First rookie season was a bit rough. I thought he made strides last year, and I think he's off to a good start so far in 2023. Now, the other linebacker, their Mike linebacker, Cody Barton, who they signed after he started his career in Seattle. It's his first year with the Commanders. He looks rough. He is struggling. I didn't love him in Seattle, and I think he's been disappointing so far through a couple games with Washington. I think he can be had in coverage for sure. A little bit of a leaner linebacker. I don't know. He doesn't profile as a consistent level starter for me. Obviously, we'll let it play out a little bit longer. But so far through 2 games, I think he's really struggled. At cornerback, it's an interesting group. Their outside corners are Kendall Fuller and Emmanuel Forbes. Kendall Fuller, I think, has been a quality corner in the league for a while. I feel like he's gotten some criticism that I don't know that's been warranted, but I think he's a quality starter. Emmanuel Forbes, their first-round pick this year. Really fascinating player. You watch him at Mississippi State, he's just a playmaker. He's a dog. He tackles. He makes plays on the ball like crazy. Really sticky in coverage, but he's small. He's 166 pounds, 6 foot 166. So he's just very, very lean. And he gave up a big touchdown against Denver last week. Also had an interception. So he's some of the things that we saw at Mississippi State are showing up, but I'm still fascinated to see how it all plays out with him at 166 pounds as an outside corner. And then Benjamin St-Juste, who's like long-armed, 6 foot, over 200 pounds. They play him in the slot. And I've studied Benjamin St-Juste at Minnesota. I've watched him in the NFL. I never thought to myself, this is a slot corner. I think he's more of a zone outside type player. But, you know, Washington really likes this big nickel, right? That's their thing that they like. And they're using Benjamin St-Juste to do that. So fascinating option that they're rolling with in the slot. I think they got a really good pair of young safeties in Cameron Curl and Derek Forrest. I think that's probably one of the best up-and-coming young pairs of safeties in the entire NFL. So those guys are really good. So what are my keys for the Bills' offense against this very talented Washington defense? I have 2 things, and they really go hand in hand. Number one is you got to win your one-on-ones up front, okay, with your offensive line against their defensive line. Like I said, this isn't the Raiders where it's Max Crosby and nothing else, okay? They got dudes. They got 4 dudes up there that can win one-on-one battles. And so you can only help so much. You're going to have to win one-on-one. Spencer Brown, Osiris Torrence, Connor McGovern, Deion Dawkins, Mitch Morris. They're going to go one-on-ones with these talented pass rushers, and you got to meet the moment. You got to win. You got to collectively have the right protection calls and win. Because that's going to open up everything, because I think there are opportunities. So number one is your pass protection schemes have to be sound, which means winning one-on-ones, because you can't help everywhere. And if you can do that, that's going to open up a lot for you, because number 2 for me is play the matchups. Get Stefon Diggs in the slot against Benjamin St-Juste. That's a nightmare matchup for St-Juste. Big, long, physical corner against a twitchy route runner. There should be separation, and the Bills have been pretty good over the last few years about motioning in Stefon Diggs to the slot and dictating those matchups. You want Diggs on St-Juste as much as possible. You want Gabe Davis on Emmanuel Forbes as much as possible. Forbes is 166 pounds. Gabe Davis is 225. That's a 60-pound difference. You got to get that matchup, and you got to go after it. I know Forbes is a dog, and he plays above his weight class, but that's 60 pounds, and it's the National Football League. You got to test that. And number 3 is you got to put Cody Barton in conflict. To me, he looks like the slug of this defense. I think he can be had in coverage. So getting Kincaid on Barton, getting James Cook on Barton, win up front, get your pass protection right so that you can take advantage of what I think are mismatches for the Bills' weapons against some of these Commanders' secondary players. I think that's what it really comes down to. And from there, obviously, the basic stuff, don't turn over the football, get the run game going. But I think it starts with your pass pro, and then it goes into playing the matchups. Diggs on St-Juste, Gabe Davis on Emmanuel Forbes, and putting Cody Barton in conflict. Let's get into special teams real quick. There's some fascinating elements with this special teams. And it starts with their long snapper, Cameron Cheeseman. They are trying hard to replace this guy. He's a very inconsistent snapper. They worked out 5 guys this week to replace him. They didn't sign any of them. And so this guy knows he's snapping for his life right now. And he had a funky snap against Denver that resulted in a missed field goal. And I think that's kind of the wrap on him. He's had inconsistency. And you're an NFL long snapper. You can't have inconsistency. And so we'll see what happens there. He's looking like he's going to get this opportunity. And he's snapping with a lot of pressure on him. Their kicker is Joey Sly, who I think is a highly inconsistent kicker. He's only 77% for his career from 40 to 49 yards. Super high variance. Maybe some of that's a snapper, but he was erratic in Carolina too. He's only made 88% of his extra points. Super low percentage. Only 82.2% of his field goals made for his career. He's been a kicker since 2019, so he's had a lot of opportunity. There's a big sample size of him being inconsistent. Now, their punter's really good, Tress Way. Been one of the best punters in the NFL for a long time. He's been in Washington since 2014. And then your returner is Jamison Crowder is your punt returner. They just signed him to do that. And then at kick returner, it's Chris Rodriguez and Antonio Gibson. And I don't know, Antonio Gibson's like 220-something pounds with good speed. I'm not sure that I want to get him going with a head of steam against my kick return units. My kick coverage units. I might be playing the touchbacks this week and see if Sam Howell can drive them the distance of the field. So yeah, but that's the Commanders. Pretty in-depth conversation. Have a lot to say about this football team. Not a super familiar opponent for the Bills, so I wanted to give you plenty of intel, and obviously Sam Howell as a guy about to start his 4th game. I wanted to give a lot of information there. So hope you enjoyed this. Hope this allows you to feel ready for the game on Sunday. But we still have one more conversation coming this week. On our conversation tomorrow, I'm going to give you my final thoughts on the matchup. We're going to talk to Dr. Kyle Trimble of Banged Up Bills about injuries, and there's some stuff to get into with Leonard Floyd, with Micah Hyde, with Dawson Knox, with Terrel Bernard. So we got some stuff to get into there, as well as my 5 predictions. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.